The silence of the palace was deafening. Princess Eleanor stood at the grand window of her chamber, watching the morning mist rise from the gardens below. The golden threads of her dress caught the early sunlight, making her appear ethereal, untouchable, exactly what she felt she had become. A beautiful ornament in a gilded cage. Hey there. Thanks for being here. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you think of the story. Let's keep going, Your Highness, came a soft voice behind her. The prince requests your presence in the royal hall. Eleanor didn't turn. She had grown accustomed to being summoned like a prized possession, displayed when needed, forgotten when not. The marriage arrangement with Prince William felt more like a political transaction than a union of hearts. He spoke to her with the same detached courtesy one might use with a distant acquaintance. "Tell him I'll be there shortly," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As the servant's footsteps faded down the marble corridor, Eleanor pressed her palm against the cold glass. Somewhere beyond these walls lived people who laughed freely, who chose their own paths, who felt truly alive. She envied them their simplicity, their authenticity. A movement in the garden caught her eye, a figure carrying water buckets, moving with quiet efficiency among the roses. For a moment, their eyes met through the window. The man below paused, as if sensing her gaze, then quickly looked away and continued his work. Something stirred in Eleanor's chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name, but it felt dangerously like hope. Josiah's hands were rough from years of labor, callous from carrying stone and wood, from scrubbing floors until they gleamed like mirrors. He moved through the palace corridors like a shadow, present but unseen, necessary but unacknowledged. This was the way of his world, to serve without being noticed, to exist without truly living. He had felt her eyes on him that morning in the garden. The princess. He shouldn't have looked up, shouldn't have met her gaze, even for the brief moment. Such things were dangerous for someone like him. Slaves who forgot their place didn't live long in the kingdom. Josiah, the sharp voice of master. Henrik, the head groundskeeper, cut through his thoughts. The rose garden needs tending, and the fountain requires cleaning before the evening feast. Yes, sir. The words came automatically, as they always did, as he worked among the roses, their sweet fragrance filling the air. Josiah allowed himself a moment to remember a different life, before the raids, before his village burned, before chains and masters, an invisible existence. He had been someone, then a blacksmith's apprentice, with dreams of creating beautiful things with his hands. Now those same hands only cleaned and carried and served. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden when he heard footsteps on the stone path, light, careful steps that didn't belong to any of the groundskeepers or guards. He kept his head down, continuing to trim the rose bushes, but his senses heightened. The roses are beautiful today. The voice was soft, musical. He knew without looking that it belonged to her, the princess whose eyes had found his that morning. Josiah's hand stilled on the pruning shears. Speaking to royalty without permission was forbidden. Looking at them directly could mean punishment. Yet something in her tone made him pause. "Thank you, Your Highness," he said quietly. Still not raising his eyes, Eleanor stood a few feet away, close enough that he could see the embroidered hem of her silk gown. She was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that they were both prisoners in their own ways. "What's your name?" she asked. The question surprised him. In 5 years of service at the palace, no member of the royal family had ever asked his name. He was simply another pair of hands, another back to bear burdens. "Josiah, Your Highness, Josiah," she repeated softly, as if testing how it sounded. "It's a strong name." He risked a glance upward and immediately regretted it. Her eyes were the color of autumn leaves, warm and sad and achingly human. In them, he saw a loneliness that matched his own, a yearning for something real in a world built on pretense. "I should return to my duties," he said, looking away quickly. "Of course, Her voice carried a note of disappointment. Perhaps, I'll walk in the garden again tomorrow. She left without another word, her footsteps fading into the distance. Josiah remained motionless among the roses, his heart beating faster than it should, knowing that everything had changed with that simple exchange of names. That night, as he lay on his straw mattress in the servants' quarters, he stared at the ceiling and wondered if tomorrow she would come again. And despite every instinct that told him to avoid her, despite knowing the dangers such thoughts brought, he found himself hoping that she would. Eleanor found herself walking to the garden every afternoon, always with a different excuse. She needed fresh air. The roses required inspection. The fountain's music soothed her nerves before dinner with Prince William, and his endless talk of military strategies and territorial expansion. In truth, she came for the quiet conversations with Josiah. He was always there, tending to some task or another, and she had learned to time her visits when the other servants were busy elsewhere. Their exchanges were brief, careful, but with each passing day, the invisible walls between princess and slave began to crack. "You have an education," she observed one afternoon, watching him arrange stones around the fountain's base with mathematical precision. "I can tell by the way you speak, the way you work." Josiah paused, his hand still on the smooth river rock. "My father believed learning was the one thing no master could take from a man. Was he right?" A bitter smile crossed his face. "They took everything else." Eleanor stepped closer, close enough to see the old scars on his wrists from the shackles, close enough to catch the scent of earth and roses that clung to his clothes. "Tell me about before." The request hung in the air between them. Josiah looked around quickly, ensuring they were alone, then sat back on his heels. "There was a village," he began, his voice distant, "near the mountains, where the air was always crisp and clean. My father was the blacksmith. I was learning the trade, how to shape metal, how to create beauty from raw iron. What happened? Raiders came in the night, the king's men, they said, collecting taxes in the form of people." His jaw tightened. "My parents fought back. They didn't survive it." Eleanor's hand moved instinctively toward him, then stopped. Such a gesture would be seen, would be questioned. Instead, she knelt on the ground beside him, propriety forgotten. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Why?" His dark eyes met hers directly for the first time. "You weren't there. You didn't give the orders." "Because I wear the crown of those who did." The words surprised them both. Eleanor had never spoken so directly about the weight of her position, the guilt that came with privilege built on others' suffering. Josiah stared at her, seeing not a princess in that moment, but a woman grappling with uncomfortable truths. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "What was your before?" Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've never had a before, only the ceremonies and expectations. Tutors teaching me to smile prettily and speak in careful phrases that offend no one and mean nothing." "You mean something now." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Eleanor's breath caught, and for a moment the garden around them seemed to disappear. There was only the space between them, charged with an electricity that neither dared name. Josiah, Princess Eleanor. The sharp voice of Lady Margaret, her primary attendant, cut through the moment like a blade. "The prince is waiting for you in the blue parlor." Eleanor rose quickly, brushing dirt from her skirts. Lady Margaret's eyes were sharp, taking in every detail. Eleanor's flushed cheeks, Josiah's hastily averted gaze, the intimate distance between them. "Of course," Eleanor replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I was just admiring the stonework." As she walked away, she didn't look back, but she could feel Josiah's eyes following her. Lady Margaret fell into step beside her, silent but watchful. That evening, Eleanor sat through dinner with Prince William, nodding at appropriate moments as he discussed trade agreements and border disputes. But her mind was in the garden, replaying every word, every glance, every moment when the space between her and Josiah had seemed to shrink. She was playing with fire. She knew But after years of feeling nothing, the warmth was intoxicating. Later that night, as she prepared for bed, Lady Margaret approached with unusual directness. "Your Highness," she said carefully, "perhaps it would be wise to vary your afternoon walks. The East Gardens are lovely this time of year." Eleanor met her. Attendants gaze in the mirror. Are they? Indeed. And much less populated. The warning was clear. Eleanor nodded slowly, understanding that her stolen moments had not gone unnoticed. But as she lay in her bed that night, staring at the canopy above, she knew that no warning would be enough to keep her away from the one person who made her feel truly alive. For 3 days, Eleanor stayed away from the gardens. She walked the East corridors as Lady Margaret had suggested, attended extra embroidery lessons, and spent longer hours in the library reading about diplomatic protocols. But the words blurred together on the pages, and her needlework became a tangled mess of broken threads. Prince William noticed her distraction during their evening meal on the 3rd day. "You seem unusually quiet, Eleanor," he said, cutting his meat with precise movements. "Are you unwell?" "Just tired, my lord. Perhaps you should rest more. A princess must maintain her health and appearance." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the maintenance of a prized horse. "The wedding preparations will begin soon, and there will be many public appearances." Eleanor nodded dutifully, but inside, something rebelled against the casual way he spoke of their future together, as if she were simply another item on his list of acquisitions. That night, she made her decision. The next afternoon, she returned to the rose garden. Josiah was there, as she knew he would be, repairing a section of the stone wall that bordered the fountain. He looked up when her shadow fell across his work, and something in his expression shifted, relief mixed with concern. "You came back," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have." "No, you shouldn't." They looked at each other across the dangerous space between princess and slave, both understanding that they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. "I've been thinking about what you said," Eleanor continued, moving closer despite every rational thought screaming at her to leave, "about meaning something." Josiah set down his tools and stood slowly. "Your Highness, Eleanor, when we're alone." Just Eleanor. The name fell between them like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread outward into territories neither had explored before. Josiah stepped back instinctively, but Eleanor followed. "This is madness," he whispered. Double quotes, "Yes. You could have me killed for speaking to you like this." "I know." "Then why?" Eleanor was close enough now to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to notice the way his breath quickened when she didn't step away. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel a weight." The confession hung in the air between them. Josiah's hands clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to reach for her. Around them, the garden seemed to hold its breath, the roses nodding in the gentle breeze, the fountain's music providing a soundtrack to their dangerous dance. "If someone sees us," he began, "then we make sure they don't." Eleanor turned and walked toward a secluded alcove where climbing vines created a natural shelter. After a moment's hesitation, Josiah followed. Hidden from view, the world seemed smaller, more intimate. The afternoon light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across their faces. "Tell me something true," Eleanor said, settling onto a marble bench beneath the vines. Josiah remained standing, maintaining what distance he could. "What do you mean?" "Something real. Something that isn't carefully crafted to please or impress or manipulate." She looked up at him with eyes that held a hunger he recognized. "I'm surrounded by lies and half-truths every day. I want to hear something honest." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "I dream of working with metal again, of creating something beautiful with my hands instead of just maintaining other people's beauty." "What would you make?" "A wind chime. Maybe something that would sing." When the breeze touched it, his voice grew softer. "My mother had one outside our kitchen window. It played the same 5 notes, over and over. but somehow it never got tiresome. Eleanor closed her eyes, imagining the sound. I've never heard anything like that. What about you? What's something true? She opened her eyes and looked directly at him. I think about you when I should be thinking about wedding preparations. The words created a silence so profound that even the fountain seemed to quiet. Josiah stared at her, this woman who could command armies with a word, who was confessing to thoughts that could destroy them both. Eleanor, he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a warning all at once. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of stolen glances and whispered conversations. Eleanor found excuses to visit different parts of the palace, where Josiah worked, the servants' corridors where he carried supplies, the courtyard where he tended the herb gardens, the shadowy alcoves where dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight. Each encounter was brief, careful, but the invisible thread connecting them grew stronger with every passing moment. This has to stop, Josiah said one afternoon as they stood in the abandoned tower stairwell, a forgotten corner of the castle where only cobwebs bore witness to their meetings. I know, Eleanor replied, but she didn't step away. Instead, she moved closer, close enough that he could see the rapid pulse at her throat. You don't understand the danger. I understand perfectly. Her voice was fierce, surprising them both. I understand that I've lived 22 years without ever feeling anything real. I understand that I'm promised to a man who speaks to me like I'm a piece of furniture. I understand that every day of my life has been planned by others. For others, Josiah pressed his back against the stone wall, as if he could somehow disappear into it. And I understand that I'm a slave who could be sold or beaten or worse for even looking at you. Then don't look at me. It was a challenge, and they both knew it. Josiah's eyes found hers anyway, and in that gaze was everything they couldn't say: the longing, the impossibility, the desperate need for connection that transcended every barrier between them. Eleanor, he whispered, and her name sounded broken on his lips. She reached out then, her fingertips barely grazing his hand. The touch was electric, sending shockwaves through both of them. Neither pulled away. I can't stop thinking about you, she confessed. During dinner with the prince, during my lessons, during the long nights when I stare at the ceiling and wonder if this emptiness is all there will ever be. You have to. But his fingers intertwined with hers as he spoke, betraying his words. Why? Because it's forbidden. Because it's dangerous. Her other hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart. Everything worth having is dangerous. The space between them disappeared entirely. Josiah's free hand rose to cup her face, his callous thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with reverent gentleness. If we do this, he said, his voice barely audible, there's no going back. There's already no going back. The truth of it settled over them like a shroud. They had already crossed too many lines, shared too many secrets, allowed their hearts to venture into territory that could only end in destruction. But in that moment, destruction seemed a small price to pay for one taste of something real. Their lips met with desperate hunger, as if they could drink in all the moments they'd never have, all the words they'd never be allowed to speak. Eleanor's hands fisted in his rough work shirt, pulling him closer, while Josiah's arms encircled her waist, lifting her until her feet barely touched the stone floor. The kiss was everything: passion and tenderness, desperation and hope, the collision of two souls who had found each other across an impossible divide. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together in the dim stairwell. What have we done? Eleanor whispered. Something beautiful, Josiah replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. Something terrible. Outside, the castle bells chimed the hour, reminding them that the world beyond their hidden sanctuary still existed, still waited with all its rules and consequences. But for now, in the fading afternoon light that slanted through the narrow window, they held each other and pretended that love could conquer kingdoms, that two hearts beating as one could somehow rewrite the laws of their world. They were wrong, of course, but they were also, in that perfect moment, completely and utterly alive. The weeks that followed their first kiss transformed Eleanor into someone she barely recognized. She moved through her daily routines, like an actress playing a role, smiling at Prince William's political discussions, nodding during her etiquette lessons, sitting through endless fittings for her wedding dress. But underneath the performance, her heart raced with the memory of Josiah's touch. They found new ways to meet. Brief encounters in the servant passages before dawn. Stolen moments in the castle's forgotten chambers. Whispered conversations in the shadows of doorways. Each meeting was a risk, but neither could resist the pull that drew them together. Beatrice suspects something, Eleanor confided one evening as she and Josiah stood in the old chapel. Moonlight streaming through stained glass windows. The loyal servant had been Eleanor's personal maid for 3 years, a former slave herself who had earned her freedom through years of faithful service. How do you know? Josiah's arm tightened around her waist. They had grown bolder in their affections, stealing touches and embraces whenever they found themselves alone. She asked fewer questions than she used to. When I disappear for hours, when I returned with dirt on my shoes or leaves in my hair. Eleanor leaned into his warmth. She knows I'm hiding something, but she's protecting me by not asking what. Can you trust her? Eleanor considered this. Beatrice had always been different from the other servants, more perceptive, more independent. She had survived things that would have broken others, and there was a quiet strength in her that Eleanor had always admired. I think so. She understands what it means to want freedom. Their conversations had grown deeper over the weeks, moving beyond the initial spark of attraction to something more profound. Eleanor learned about Josiah's dreams of creating beautiful things, of traveling beyond the kingdom's borders to lands where a man's worth wasn't determined by the circumstances of his birth. Josiah discovered Eleanor's secret passion for languages, her forbidden books hidden beneath her mattress, her longing to see the world beyond palace walls. Sometimes I imagine what it would be like, Eleanor whispered against his shoulder, to walk down a street where no one knows who I am, to choose my own clothes, my own meals, my own companions. Where would you go? Anywhere. Everywhere. She pulled back to look at him. Would you come with me? The question hung between them, dangerous in its implications. They both knew it. Was fantasy a princess and a slave could never simply disappear together? But in the darkness of the abandoned chapel, with only the stars as witnesses, they allowed themselves to dream. To the ends of the earth, Josiah replied, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of hope and impossibility. But their secret world was beginning to crack under the weight of reality. Prince William had grown more attentive lately, appearing unexpectedly at Eleanor's side, asking pointed questions about her activities. The royal counselor, Lord Aldrich, watched her with calculating eyes during court functions. Even the servants seemed more alert, more watchful. The wedding preparations are accelerating, Eleanor told Josiah during one of their meetings. Prince William wants to move the ceremony up by 2 months. Fear flickered in Josiah's eyes. Why? He says he's eager to begin our life together. But I think there's more to it. There are rumors of unrest in the eastern provinces, talks of rebellion among some of the noble houses. A royal wedding would be a show of stability, of power. And after the wedding, the question they had both been avoiding finally hung in the air between them. After the wedding, Eleanor would be Prince William's wife, bound by law and duty to a man she could never love. Their stolen moments would become impossible. Their secret meetings too dangerous to continue. I can't marry him, Eleanor said suddenly, the word surprising even her. I won't, Eleanor. I mean it. I'll find a way. Josiah silenced her with a kiss, but she could taste the salt of unshed tears on his lips. They both knew that wanting something and being able to have it were two very different things. In their world, love was a luxury that people like them could not afford. The morning sickness began 3 weeks before the wedding. Eleanor dismissed it at first as nerves, the anxiety of her approaching marriage manifesting in physical symptoms. But when the nausea persisted, when she found herself unable to stomach the sight of certain foods. When her monthly cycle failed to arrive, a terrible and wonderful realization began to dawn. She sat on the edge of her bed in the pre-dawn darkness, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. A child, Josiah's child, growing inside her even as seamstresses fitted her wedding dress, even as Prince William planned their honeymoon tour of the kingdom. The irony was almost too much to bear. Beatrice, she called softly as her maid entered with the morning washing. Water. The older woman looked up, immediately noting something different in Eleanor's expression. Your Highness, closed the door and lock it. Beatrice's eyebrows rose, but she did as requested. When she turned back, Eleanor was studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. How long have you served in this castle, Beatrice? 3 years, Your Highness, since I earned my freedom, and before that, I was elsewhere. The careful non-answer of someone who had learned not to volunteer information about a painful past. Eleanor nodded slowly. You understand, then, what it means to want something you're not allowed to have. Beatrice's expression grew wary. Your Highness, I'm not sure I'm with child. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Beatrice went very still, her dark eyes searching Eleanor's face for any sign that this might be some kind of test or trap. Prince William's child, she asked carefully. Eleanor's laugh was bitter. The prince and I have we've barely touched hands in greeting. This child belongs to someone else entirely. Understanding dawned in Beatrice's eyes, followed quickly by fear. Your Highness, you must be very careful who you tell such things to. I'm telling you because I need help. Because I think you understand what it means to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control. Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, weighing the dangers of involvement against the loyalty she felt toward the young woman, who had always treated her with kindness and respect. What do you need? She finally asked. Relief flooded through Eleanor. Time to think, to plan. Can you delay the wedding preparations somehow? Tell them I'm ill, that I need rest. For how long? I don't know yet, but I can't marry Prince William carrying another man's child. It would be treason, and when the truth came out, she didn't need to finish. They both knew the penalty for such deception. Beatrice nodded grimly. I'll see what I can do. But Your Highness, you must understand this kind of secret won't stay hidden for long. Your body will change. People will notice. I know. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to her stomach again. But maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe this child is a gift, a reason to finally choose my own path. And the father, does he know? Eleanor shook her head. Not yet, but he will. And when he does, she trailed off, not daring to voice the hope that was growing alongside the life within her. The hope that this child might be the catalyst they needed to escape their impossible situation. That afternoon, Eleanor found Josiah in the stables, mucking out stalls. The familiar scent of hay and horses filled the air as she approached, her heart hammering with the weight of what she had to tell him. We need to talk, she said quietly. He looked up from his work, immediately sensing the gravity in her tone. What's wrong? Eleanor glanced around, ensuring they were alone, then stepped closer. Something has happened, something that changes everything. What do you mean? She took his hand and placed it gently over her stomach. We're going to have a child, Josiah. The color drained from his face as the words registered. He stared at her, then at his hand pressed against her middle, then back at her face, as if trying to make sense of an impossible equation. Are you certain? Yes. The single word contained multitudes. Joy and terror, hope and despair, love and the promise of destruction all rolled into one syllable. Josiah pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest as they both tried to comprehend how completely their world had just shifted. The news of Eleanor's illness spread through the castle like wildfire. Prince William paced the corridors outside her chambers, his usual composure cracked by genuine concern mixed with frustration at the delayed wedding plans. The physicians say it's merely exhaustion. Lady Margaret reported to the prince after her third visit to Eleanor's bedside. She needs rest and quiet. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony by a few weeks. Eleanor lay beneath silk covers, playing her part perfectly pale and weak, accepting bowls of broth she couldn't keep down, apologizing for the inconvenience her condition caused. Only Beatrice knew the truth behind her pallor, the real reason for her inability to eat. "You're buying us, Tom," Beatrice whispered during one of their private moments. "But time for what? You can't hide this forever." "I know." Eleanor's hand rested protectively over her stomach. "But I need to see him, to talk about what we're going to do." That evening, using her illness as cover, Eleanor made her way through the servant passages to the old wine cellar where she and Josiah had arranged to meet. The stone chambers were cold and damp, lit only by the candle she carried, but they offered complete privacy. Josiah was already there when she arrived, his face haggard with sleepless worry. The moment he saw her, he crossed the space between them and gathered her into his arms. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling back to study her face in the flickering candlelight. "Terrified, hopeful, sick most mornings." She managed a weak smile. "All at the same time." They settled onto an old wooden crate, sitting close together in the underground chamber. The weight of their situation pressed down on them like the tons of stone above their heads. "We have to leave," Josiah said finally. "Soon. Before anyone discovers the truth. Where would we go? How would we survive? You're a slave. And she gestured helplessly at herself. "I don't know how to do anything useful. I can embroider and speak 4 languages and play the harpsichord. But I can't cook or clean or you can learn." His hands covered hers. "We'll figure it out together. And if they catch us?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken consequences. They both knew what happened to runaway slaves. They both knew the penalty for a princess who betrayed her royal duties. "Then at least we'll have tried to choose our own fate," Josiah said quietly. Eleanor was silent for a long moment, one hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "There's something else. Beatrice knows. About the baby. About us. She's helping. But she's taking a huge risk. Can we trust her?" "I think so. She understands what it means to want freedom more than safety." Eleanor looked up at him. She mentioned the old smuggling tunnels that run beneath the castle. From the days when the kingdom was at war with its neighbors. Some of them lead to the forest, others to the river. Hope flickered in Josiah's eyes. "She would show us, maybe. But Josiah, if we do this, if we run, we can never come back. We'll be fugitives for the rest of our lives. And if we stay..." Eleanor thought of Prince William's calculating eyes, of the royal counselor's suspicions, of the wedding dress hanging in her wardrobe like a beautiful prison. "If we stay, this child will be born into slavery or scandal. Either way, our baby will pay the price for our choices." The word "our" sent a shiver through both of them. Their child, their family, something that belonged to them alone in a world where nothing else did. "When?" Josiah asked. "Soon. Beatrice says she can arrange for the right guards to be on duty, create distractions. But we'll only get one chance. Then we'd better make it count." As they held each other in the cold darkness of the wine cellar, both knew they were planning something that would either give them everything they had ever wanted, or destroy them completely. But for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Eleanor felt something other than fear. She felt the stirring of hope. 3 days before the rescheduled wedding, Beatrice entered Eleanor's chambers with more than the usual breakfast tray. Hidden beneath the linen napkin were rough peasant clothes, a small pouch of coins, and a hand-drawn map. "The autumn harvest festival begins tomorrow night," she said quietly, setting the tray down and checking that the door was secure. "The entire castle will be celebrating. Guards will be drinking. Attention will be elsewhere." Eleanor examined the map. tracing the thin lines that represented the underground passages. You've walked these tunnels years ago, when I first arrived. Some of us servants used them to move supplies without disturbing the nobles. Beatrice's voice carried the weight of old memories. This passage here leads to the old mill by the river. It's been abandoned for 2 years. No one goes there anymore. And from there, there's a road that leads north toward the border provinces. I've heard that slavery has been abolished in some of those territories. Beatrice hesitated. But the journey is dangerous, especially for a woman in your condition. Eleanor folded the map carefully, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. More dangerous than staying. That afternoon, Eleanor made what she told herself would be her final appearance at court. She sat beside Prince William during the daily audience, nodding appropriately as he heard petitions from various nobles and merchants. But her mind was elsewhere, memorizing every detail of the plan. You seem much improved, Prince William observed during a break in the proceedings. The color has returned to your cheeks. Yes, my lord. I'm feeling much stronger. Good. We can't have any more delays with the wedding. The people are expecting a celebration, and I have other matters that require attention after we're wed. Something in his tone made Eleanor look at him more closely. There was a hardness in his eyes she hadn't noticed before, a calculation that made her skin crawl. Other matters. Rebellions don't suppress themselves, my dear. The eastern provinces need a firm hand, and a royal marriage will help solidify loyalty among the wavering nobles. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You'll make a perfect princess consort, beautiful, obedient, and well-bred. The casual way he spoke of suppressing rebellions, of using their marriage as a political tool, confirmed everything Eleanor had feared. She forced herself to smile back, playing her part one last time. That evening, she met with Josiah in the abandoned chapel. He had managed to gather a few supplies and knife, some rope, dried food that wouldn't spoil on the journey. Everything had to fit in a small pack that wouldn't draw attention. I spoke with a blacksmith today, Josiah said, keeping his voice low. He mentioned that Lord Malcolm has been asking questions about the castle's security, about which guards work which shifts. Eleanor's blood chilled. What kind of questions? The kind that suggests someone suspects something unusual is happening. Lord Malcolm was the king's most trusted warrior, a man whose loyalty was absolute and whose instincts were legendary. If he was investigating, their window of escape was closing rapidly. We go tomorrow night then. During the festival, Josiah nodded. Grimly, Beatrice will create a distraction in the kitchen, something to draw the guards away from the lower levels. At midnight, when the celebrations are at their peak, we meet at the entrance to the tunnels. Eleanor reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. What if something goes wrong? Then we improvise. But Eleanor, once we start down this path, there's no turning back. Are you certain this is what you want? She thought of the child growing inside her, of the life of freedom they could build together away from the suffocating constraints of the kingdom. She thought of Prince William's cold ambitions and the royal counselor's calculating gaze. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. As they parted ways that night, neither spoke of their fears, of all the things that could go wrong, of the possibility that this might be their last moment together. Instead, they held each other close and made silent promises for the future. They hoped to build. Tomorrow night, everything would change, one way or another. Their old lives would end, and something entirely new would begin. The harvest festival erupted across the castle grounds as the sun set on what Eleanor hoped would be her last day as a princess. Music and laughter echoed through the corridors while she sat in her chambers, dressed in her finest gown for what everyone believed would be her final public appearance. Before the wedding, she played her part perfectly, mingling with guests, accepting congratulations, and smiling until her cheeks ached. Prince William stayed close to her side, his possessive hand on her arm a constant reminder of the life she was about to reject. You look radiant tonight, he murmured in her ear. during a particularly lively dance. Marriage suits you already. Thank you, my lord, she replied, fighting the urge to pull away from his touch. As the evening progressed, Eleanor watched the guards carefully. Many had abandoned their posts to join the festivities. Just as Beatrice had predicted, wine flowed freely, and discipline grew lax as the celebration reached its peak at 11:30. Eleanor excused herself, claiming fatigue. Prince William kissed her hand with theatrical gallantry, announcing to the gathered nobles that his bride needed her rest before their wedding day. "Sweet dreams, my dear," he called after her, and Eleanor had to suppress a shudder at the possessive satisfaction in his voice. In her chambers, Beatrice waited with the peasant clothes and a dark cloak. They worked quickly and silently, transforming Eleanor from princess to commoner. The rough fabric felt strange against her skin, but it also felt like freedom. "The kitchen fire I started should keep the guards busy for another hour," Beatrice whispered as she braided Eleanor's hair into a simple style. "The tunnel entrance is clear, and Josiah is already waiting." Eleanor turned to face the woman who had risked everything to help her. "Come with us, Beatrice. You don't have to stay here. This is my home now, Your Highness. Besides, someone needs to delay the search when they discover you're gone." Beatrice smiled sadly. "I'll tell them you were distraught about the wedding, that you went for a walk in the gardens to clear your head." They embraced briefly. To women from different worlds united by their understanding of what it meant to seek freedom at any cost, Eleanor made her way through the servant passages, her heart hammering as she navigated the familiar corridors that now felt foreign in the darkness. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every sound made her freeze in terror. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the old armory. Just as Beatrice had described, Eleanor pushed aside the loose stones, revealing a narrow opening that disappeared into blackness. Josiah emerged from the shadows like a ghost, carrying their meager supplies and wearing clothes as rough as hers. In the dim light, he looked like any common laborer. But to Eleanor, he had never been more beautiful. "Ready?" he whispered. "Ready." They squeezed through the opening and into the tunnel beyond. The passage was narrow and damp, carved from living rock. Centuries ago, Eleanor's fine shoes, unsuitable for such terrain, slipped on the wet stones. But Josiah's steady hand kept her upright. They moved as quickly as they dared, following Beatrice's map through a maze of forgotten passages. The air grew thicker as they descended, and Eleanor found herself fighting nausea, whether from her condition or from fear. She couldn't tell. Behind them, the sounds of the festival grew fainter, replaced by the drip of water and the echo of their footsteps. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the faint hope of a life they could call their own. "How much further?" Eleanor whispered as they paused at a junction of 3 tunnels. Josiah consulted the map by candlelight. "Half a mile, maybe less. We're almost there." "Almost free," Eleanor added, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe it might actually be true. But freedom, they would soon discover, was more complicated than simply escaping the castle walls. They emerged from the tunnels as the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon. The abandoned mill stood before them like a monument to forgotten dreams, its wooden wheel frozen by years of neglect, its walls covered in creeping vines. But to Eleanor and Josiah, it looked like salvation. Eleanor collapsed against the mill's stone foundation, her legs shaking from exhaustion and the strain of their underground journey. The rough peasant clothes were damp with sweat and tunnel moisture. Her carefully arranged hair had come loose, and her hands were scraped raw from feeling their way through the darkness. "We made it," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Josiah knelt beside her, offering water from their precious supply. The first part, anyway. They rested only briefly before moving on. The map showed a network of back roads that would take them north, away from the kingdom's heart and toward the border territories. But traveling in daylight meant exposure, and their distinctive features Eleanor's refined bearing. Josiah's slave brands barely hidden beneath his sleeves could betray them. We need to change everything about ourselves, Josiah said as they walked along a narrow forest path, staying well away from the main roads. New names, new histories, new ways of speaking and moving. Eleanor nodded, though the thought of completely reinventing herself was both terrifying and exhilarating. What should we call ourselves? Simple names, common ones. He considered this. Anna, maybe? And I'll be just Josiah. No family names, nothing that connects us to the castle. Anna. Eleanor repeated, testing how it felt on her tongue. Anna and Josiah. A blacksmith and, what was I? A teacher's daughter from a village that burned in the border wars. You know how to read and write, but you're not nobility. You're seeking a new life in the Northern Territories. They practiced their new identities as they walked, creating shared memories of a past that never existed with each mile. Eleanor felt herself shedding layers of her former life. Like a snake discarding its skin that by midday, they reached a small farming community where the sight of travelers was common enough not to draw attention. They purchased supplies with Beatrice's carefully hoarded coins, bread, cheese, a worn traveling pack, and sturdy boots to replace Eleanor's impractical shoes. The merchant who served them was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She looked at Eleanor and Anna with gentle curiosity. You look tired, dear. Long journey? Yes, Mom, Eleanor replied, proud of how naturally the common speech came to her lips. We're heading north, looking for work. He's a blacksmith, the woman observed, noting Josiah's calloused hands and the way he examined a horseshoe with professional interest. Always need good smiths in the mining towns up that way. And you? I can teach children their letters, Eleanor said. In the village where I grew up, before the Troubles, I helped the schoolmaster. The woman nodded approvingly. Education's important, even out here. Maybe especially out here. She wrapped their purchases carefully. You'd have married long. Eleanor and Josiah exchanged glances. They hadn't discussed this aspect of their disguise, but the assumption was natural enough. Recently, Josiah said, stepping closer to Eleanor and taking her hand, we're still learning about each other. The merchant smiled. That's the best part, isn't it? The discovering. She handed them their supplies, safe travels, and may you find what you're looking for up north. As they left the shop, Eleanor felt Josiah's hand still warm in hers. The casual intimacy of the gesture, the way the merchant had accepted them as a normal couple seeking a normal life, filled her with unexpected joy. How far to the border? She asked as they resumed their journey. 3 days, maybe 4 if we stay off the main roads. Josiah squeezed her hand gently. How are you feeling? The baby. Eleanor placed her free hand over her stomach, where their child grew in secret safety strong. Like this is exactly where we're supposed to be. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Anna was choosing her own path, writing her own story. And despite the dangers that surely lay ahead, she had never felt more alive. 6 months later, the village of Millbrook had become home in ways Eleanor had never imagined possible. The small settlement nestled in the valley beyond the old kingdom's borders was everything the castle had not been. Simple, honest, and blessedly free. Anna, as she now thought of herself completely, stood in the doorway of their modest cottage, watching Josiah work at the forge he had built with his own hands. The rhythmic ring of hammer on metal had become the soundtrack of their new life, each strike shaping not just iron but their future together. Her hand rested on the gentle curve of her belly, now impossible to hide beneath her simple wool dress. The villagers had accepted their story without question, a young married couple seeking a fresh start after losing their home in the border conflicts. No one questioned why a blacksmith's wife could read Latin, or why she sometimes forgot to respond to common expressions. Mrs. Anna called young Timothy, one of her students, as he ran up the path with his slate clutched in his grubby hands. Look, I wrote my name all by myself, and a note carefully to examine his work, praising the crooked letters that spelled out his achievement. Teaching the village children had given her a purpose she had never known she needed. These lessons in the small schoolhouse were nothing like the elaborate tutorials of her former life. No silk gowns or imported texts, just eager young minds and the simple joy of learning. Excellent work, Timothy. Practice writing your family's names next and bring them to show me tomorrow. As the boy scampered off, Josiah approached, wiping soot from his hands on his leather apron. The physical work had changed him, adding muscle to his frame and a confidence to his bearing that slavery had stolen. His dark eyes held a contentment that made Anna's heart swell. "How was your day?" he asked, his arms sliding around her waist. As naturally as breathing, full of small victories, she replied, leaning into his warmth. Timothy wrote his name, Sarah mastered her numbers to 20, and Mrs. Henderson brought us fresh bread as payment for her son's lessons. "And you? How are you feeling?" Anna placed her hand over his where it rested on her growing belly. "Tired, but happy. The baby was very active during lessons today. I think he or she enjoys the sound of children learning." They had discussed names in the evenings, sitting by their small fireplace as Josiah carved wooden toys, and Anna mended clothes by candlelight. Simple, domestic activities that filled Anna with a peace she had never known existed. "I had a visitor today," Josiah said as they walked inside their cottage, "a merchant from the Northern Territories. He mentioned that Lord Malcolm has been seen asking questions in the border towns." Anna's contentment wavered slightly. They had known this day might come that their past would eventually catch up with them. But 6 months of peaceful life had lulled them into hoping they had truly escaped. How close? Still several villages away. But Anna, Josiah turned to face her, his expression serious. "We need to be prepared. We might have to move again." Anna looked around their small home at the rough wooden table Josiah had made, at the shelves lined with her teaching materials, at the cradle he had been carving in secret for their child. This was the first place that had ever truly felt like home. "Not yet," she said firmly. "Let's wait and see what happens. Maybe he's not looking for us specifically. Maybe we're safe here." But even as she spoke the words, Anna knew that safety was always temporary for people like them. Still, she refused to live in constant fear. They had built something beautiful here, something worth protecting. That night, as they lay in their simple bed listening to the village settle into peaceful sleep, Anna placed Josiah's hand on her belly to feel their child's movements. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we gave our baby this 6 months of freedom, of love, of hope. And we'll give them more," Josiah replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Whatever it takes." Lord Malcolm arrived in Millbrook on a gray autumn morning. 3 weeks after the merchant's warning, Anna was teaching her morning class when she saw him through the schoolhouse window, tall, weathered, unmistakable in his bearing even without his armor. Her blood turned to ice. "Children," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "practice your letters quietly. I'll be back." In a moment, she stepped outside, her hand instinctively protecting her now prominent belly. Malcolm stood in the village square, speaking with the baker, and when his eyes found hers across the distance, she saw a recognition flicker in his gaze. He approached slowly, his hands visible and empty, a gesture of peace that did little to calm her racing heart. "Anna, isn't it?" he said when he reached her. "The teacher." "Yes." The word came out steadier than she felt. "I wonder if we might speak privately. I have questions about the old country." Anna nodded toward the small garden behind the schoolhouse, away from curious eyes. Malcolm followed, his weathered face unreadable. "You've built a good life here," he observed, taking in the well-tended cottage, the sound of children's laughter. From the schoolhouse, the distant ring of Josiah's hammer. "We have. The villagers speak highly of you both. They say the blacksmith is honest and skilled, that the teacher is patient and kind." Malcolm's eyes dropped to her belly. "And that you're expecting your first child." Anna lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Is that why you're here? To threaten an unborn child?" "No." Malcolm's voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I'm here because because I've spent 6 months following orders to find a runaway princess and her slave, and in that time, I've seen too much." Something in his tone made Anna look at him more carefully. The lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, and there was a weariness in his posture that hadn't been there at court. "What have you seen? Villages burned in the name of stability, families torn apart to suppress rebellion, good people hanged because they asked for fair treatment." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I've watched Prince William become the kind of ruler who uses fear as his primary tool of governance." Anna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. And I've come to realize that perhaps some people have good reason to run. The admission hung between them, laden with implications that could reshape everything. Anna studied Malcolm's face, searching for deception and finding only a man wrestling with his conscience. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing." Malcolm reached inside his cloak and withdrew a small leather pouch. "This contains gold and a map showing safe passage to the Northern Territories, where slavery has been completely abolished. There are communities there that welcome skilled craftsmen and teachers." Anna stared at the pouch, hardly daring to hope. "Why?" "Because I've seen what you've built here. Because I've watched the prince's true nature emerge, and I know what fate would await you if you return." Malcolm's voice grew firm. "Because some loyalties are higher than those to crown and kingdom. Won't they question your failure to find us?" "They'll question it, yes. But I'm an old warrior with decades of faithful service. I can afford to fail once, especially when I report that the fugitives are likely dead, lost in the wilderness during their escape." Anna felt tears prick her eyes. "You're risking everything for people you barely know." "I'm doing what I should have done months ago, choosing conscience over convenience." Malcolm stepped back, preparing to leave. "You have perhaps a week before others may come. Use it wisely." As he walked away, Anna clutched the pouch to her chest, feeling the weight of this unexpected mercy. When Josiah appeared at her side, having seen the exchange from his forge, she turned to him with eyes bright. "With possibility, we have a choice," she said simply. "We can run to true safety, or we can stay and keep looking over our shoulders." Josiah pulled her close, his hand covering hers where it rested on their child. "Then we choose our child's future over our fear of change." That night, they began to plan their final journey, this time not as desperate fugitives, but as a family, moving toward a future they could build together, free from the shadows of their past. 2 years later, Anna stood in the doorway of their workshop in the mountain town of Haven's Rest, watching their son Isaiah take his first and steady steps across the wooden floor. The sound of his delighted laughter mixed with the gentle ring of Josiah's hammer, as he shaped a delicate wind chime, their first creation together that served no purpose but beauty. "He's getting stronger every day," Josiah said, setting down his tools to sweep Isaiah into his arms. The little boy had his father's dark eyes and his mother's determined chin, and he moved through the world with the fearless curiosity of a child who had never known anything but freedom. Anna smiled, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their second child grew. This pregnancy felt different, peaceful, anticipated with joy rather than fear. There would be no secrets this time, no desperate flights in the darkness. This child would be born free, in a community that celebrated new life rather than questioning its origins. "The Hendersons are coming for dinner tonight," Anna said, referring to their neighbors who had become close friends. "And Margaret wants to discuss expanding the school." The school had been Anna's greatest achievement in Haven's Rest. What had started as informal lessons for a handful of children had grown into the town's first proper educational institution. Anna taught reading and writing while Josiah instructed the older boys in metalwork and practical skills. Their partnership had become a model for the community, to people using their different talents to build something greater together. "And what did you tell her?" "That we'd need to hire another teacher soon." Anna's smile widened. "I suspect I'll be somewhat occupied with other matters in a few months." Josiah set Isaiah down and crossed to her, his arms encircling her waist. as naturally as sunrise followed night. These small intimacies, the casual affection of a couple who had chosen each other freely, still filled Anna with wonder. No political arrangements, no considerations of bloodline or advantage, just two hearts that had found their match. Isaiah toddled over to the wind chime his father had been crafting, reaching up with chubby fingers to touch the delicate metal pieces. The soft, melodic sound they made when disturbed filled the workshop with music. "Tell me the story again, Mama," he said in his clear, piping voice. About the princess and the brave man. Anna and Josiah exchanged amused glances. Somehow, their son had intuited that there was a grand adventure in his parents' past, though they had never spoken of their former lives directly. Once upon a time, Anna began, settling into the rocking chair Josiah had made for her. There was a princess who lived in a beautiful castle but felt very lonely. And there was a man who worked very hard but dreamed of creating beautiful things. Were they sad? Isaiah asked, climbing onto her lap with the easy trust of a beloved child. For a while. Yes, but then they found each other, and they discovered that the most important kingdom isn't made of stone and gold, it's made of love, and family, and the freedom to choose your own path. And they lived happily ever after. Anna looked at Josiah, at their son, at the life they had built with their own hands and hearts. Outside, the mountains rose toward a sky painted with the colors of sunset, and somewhere in the town below, friends were preparing to share their evening meal. The wind chime sang its gentle song, a melody of contentment that would have been impossible in the marble halls of her former prison. They lived happily, Anna said, pressing a kiss to Isaiah's dark hair. And they lived free, which is the very best kind of ever after there is. As evening fell over Haven's Rest, the small family gathered around their simple table, sharing bread they had baked themselves and stories of the day's small victories. Outside, the world continued its ancient dance of power and politics. But here in their chosen kingdom of love, Anna and Josiah had found something worth more than any crown, a life built on truth, sustained by choice, and blessed with the daily miracle of freedom. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next story.